Cyberpunk 2077, the game that will go down in infamy due to being released way too early. And for a game that was in development hell for roughly 9 years, it's a wonder that it was actually released. This game really had a lot of potential, and in so many ways it lived up to that potential. But there were still so many ways that it didn't, with some very obvious offenders. There are a lot of problems with this game, and we'll get into those a little bit later, but there is also so much good. The media, as it does with most things, displays the bad on a pedestal because it gets clicks. And I don't really blame them for doing that with Cyberpunk either. There were a lot of people that couldn't play this game at launch due to hardware limitations, and people really needed to know that. I was one of the lucky ones who didn't have very many technical problems with the game because of my high-end PC, and as a result, here we are. I played the game, so now I can tell you my thoughts on it. Starting out, I really want to talk about the world of Cyberpunk 2077. The environments found in this game vary so much from other games I have played. There is so much to look at, from the neon lights to the beautiful skyline. The developers at CD Projekt Red really did something amazing. The Cyberpunk genre is also really open to interpretation, and CDPR took it and ran with it. Cyberpunk 2077 is clearly set in the year 2077, and it depicts a future where technology and sex are at the forefront of every interaction. While playing, I got the idea that things like sex became so prevalent because technology became something so integrated into their everyday life. I think this made a lot of people lose their feelings and emotions, so they doubled down on the strongest feeling you can get in the form of sexual pleasure. Now, I'm not really here to talk about the ideology of sex in the future, but this does lead me to bring up my favorite futuristic idea in the game, braindance. Braindance is such an interesting concept, and being able to see how Cyberpunk depicts it is very cool. Braindance is essentially being able to record everything a person experiences. This includes everything their brain would process, including all of their senses. The first time I did a braindance in the game was also the moment that it really hit me how far advanced this world was technologically compared to our own. Obviously, you see a lot of crazy tech stuff all around, but this was something on another level to me. Going forward, the futuristic tech found in Cyberpunk started to feel more natural to the world. It seemed strangely normal to see a guy with what looked like the night vision goggles he got from getting the Prestige edition of Modern Warfare 2 implanted into his face. After a while, I ended up getting my own bizarre cybernetic enhancements. I chose a pair of mantis blades, and while it did take a little bit to get used to these big knives coming out of my forearms, I ended up being really happy with my choice, when I could do things like this. While braindance helped me get used to the futuristic tech found in the world, there was another very specific moment that made me understand the grim setting that lies hidden between all of the neon lights. After a session with a Ripper Doc, who installed a new pair of eyes into my character that added a heads-up display to my game, I went out into an alley to check it out. In the same alley, there was a cat, an adult, and a little kid. At this moment, I was wondering what would happen if I took aim at the cat, and not to my surprise, my character lowered his weapon. I then moved my cursor towards the little kid, and my character did the same, lowering his weapon. I continued on and aimed at the adult, and they instantly put their hands up into the air, and the little kid took off running. What caught me off guard was where the kid was sitting, I found a fully loaded pistol. Confused as to why there was a pistol there, I promptly reloaded my save to check it out. To my astonishment, I found the kid there playing with the pistol, checking it out, including looking down the barrel. This scene instantly immersed me into the insane world that I was exploring. Everything I said before is how I honestly feel about the world. Exploring it is so fun because you never know what you're gonna find. Night City is an awesome city to explore, and it's got so much for you to do and see. One thing I never got though is how much everybody talked about Night City. Night City this, Night City that. Almost every named character brings up how much they love or hate Night City. You hear so much about the city during the course of the game that it seems telling people you're a vegan was replaced with, yeah, I took a piss one time in Night City. Maybe they're just delusional though, because things don't tend to change at Night City. Going back to the same areas multiple times isn't always as interesting. While the skyscrapers and the lights are usually pleasant to see, seeing some of the same views over and over gets a bit old at times. This is especially true for the apartment complex that your character lives in. The first time walking through, it was so interesting and filled with so many random NPCs that all look very different. But by the fourth walkthrough, you've basically seen it all. You know where each NPC will be, and you know what they're going to say. Their dialogue doesn't really change, and everything around them is always where it was. The random NPCs are not the greatest, and they could definitely have used a bit more dev time, but at least they're making the city feel lived in. As I said earlier, I was lucky. I didn't really have to deal with many glitches while playing the game. Of course, I still had some come up while I was playing, but for the most part they didn't really affect the game enough for me to be bothered. I'll go over some of the glitches I dealt with while playing, but we won't be on glitches for very long. What I really want to bring up is my actual gripes with the game, things I didn't really like all that much. First off, the thing I noticed about the glitches, at least for me, was the farther that I got into the game, the more apparent they became. The beginning of the game felt way more polished compared to the late game missions. While that was true for me, there were still some minor glitches I experienced near the beginning. One of these early glitches was while I was doing a mission. Something or other didn't load right, and I was essentially soft-locked from completing the mission. I simply saved and reloaded the game, and it was fixed. This happened twice during main story missions, one near the beginning and another time like 3/4 of the way through. I also had this happen during some side missions, but the save or load trick only worked with a select few. The others never worked when I retried them. They might have worked eventually, but I never went back to check. While doing a main story mission, there was a rock and roll song as the backtrack to set the tone and make it feel hype. I really enjoyed the mission, and the music definitely helped with that. The problem with it was that the song never stopped playing. After that mission, a cutscene started to play that was more serious in tone, but in the background, all I could hear was the rock music being played over the track that was actually supposed to be playing at the time. I came across a lot of smaller bugs throughout the playthrough as well, things like cars floating a foot off the ground, or objects that characters were holding just floating in the air or being stuck in their hands. Although these were small bugs that didn't get in the way too much, they did really break the immersion that the world worked so hard to build. And like I said earlier, they became more apparent during the latter half of the game, and they really started to bother me, especially because I was starting to get really invested in the story. Emotional story beats were sometimes ruined because of these small glitches, and that really sucked. According to CDPR, many of the glitches will most likely be patched out eventually. This is why I didn't want to spend too much time on them, but I still felt it necessary to touch on them. Now I want to get into what issues I had with the actual game. These will exclusively be things that I didn't like about the game and not glitches. I loved this game. I really enjoyed just about everything it had to offer. I was very nervous about getting into it because I have the tendency to realize very quickly that I don't like something in a game and then put it down and never play it again. I really didn't want that to be the case with this one, so I went into it planning on dealing with whatever I came across that I didn't particularly like, and there were definitely things that I found that I hated about this game. Let's start with the minor issues I had and gradually build up to the things I hated. It takes a bit to realize that most people don't die by getting shot in the head once, until of course you get some really good late game guns. Maybe I just wasn't playing right, but for the most part, a lot of the guns I had in the beginning of the game felt very underpowered. Another thing is that I never really felt like I was making very much money during the missions I was doing. Each mission pays roughly 500 to 1,000 eddies, and I just didn't think that was enough for the stuff I was doing, especially compared to how much the cars in the game costed you. This resulted in me using the drop point exploit a lot, because I really liked the cars in the game and I wanted a lot of them. I never liked going back to my apartment. You have to sit in the elevator loading zone, while albeit is kinda clever, but it takes forever to go through and completely ruins the pacing of the game. Going back and forth through the apartment building each time is what helped me realize that NPCs usually are just saying the same stuff and sitting in the same spots they always are. Driving in video games is probably one of my favorite things in all of video games. I love to see how different developers integrate driving into their game. Some do it very well, while others, not so much. The driving in Cyberpunk 2077 is really bad to say the least. It's like you're playing Grand Theft Auto, but all the cars are tanks that don't turn. The turning radius is so dumb. The best way to describe it is that it's like driving a tractor that moves very, very fast. Before release, CDPR talked about how each car would drive differently. When I first got into my character's car, I really hoped that that was the case. Luckily, it was. There are a lot of cars in the game, and they each do drive a bit differently. When you are finally able to get your hands on a motorcycle or a sports car, driving won't be that much of a hassle anymore. Well, it'll still be, but at least it's better than hopping into your John Deere 8320. The other thing that really messes with driving in this game is the minimap navigation. The game's GPS system is probably one of the worst I've seen in any video game. There were a number of times that while I was playing, that it would lead me to a dead end or want me to get onto an overpass that was 3 stories above me. It may be 2077, but my 2005 Garmin Nuvi would have done a better job getting me to Lizzie's bar than the actual in-game GPS. And that's after it took me down 3 roads that were closed due to construction. The worst problem with the GPS though is that when you're in a car, it zooms in so much that you never have time to slow down and take your ridiculously wide turn because you're too poor to afford a car that can actually turn. Oh, I'm sorry, random person. I didn't mean to kill you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss my turn. My biggest complaint with this game was the user interface. I really don't like it. It seems kind of cluttered, it's a pain to navigate, and it looks very confusing. It's clear that they went with a stylistic approach, and it does that very well, but the usefulness of it is gone as a result. Of course we know that it's possible to do both though. I mean, just look at Persona 5. Okay, let's take a look at the HUD for a bit. It really doesn't look all that bad, does it? Red and blue aesthetic, makes sense, and it fits the theme for what they're going for. The problem is that the red is so hard to see sometimes. For the most part, it's just an accent color on random text on the side of things to keep up with the overall immersion. Then why is it the same color as the guns? At least sometimes the HUD does change to blue and yellow, which is far easier to see. The inventory system isn't terrible to say the least, but when you're selecting weapons, why is there so much empty space over here? When you start to carry a lot of guns on you, it takes too long to scroll down to the bottom, and that could have just been fixed by adding a 3rd row. The map isn't terrible. I don't like it, but it's not that bad. For the most part, I used it as a glorified mission menu. I could tell where I was, and I would just track the closest mission to my current location. Doing that, though, makes me rely on the GPS. The skill tree made no sense for the longest time. Looking at it and comparing it to your knowledge on other skill trees, you'd think that to get this upgrade, you would have to get these upgrades along the path. No, that's not how it works. You just have to have the right attribute level to be able to unlock certain skills. No prior skills needed to unlock. Then why did they make it look that way? The last thing I wasn't too fond of was the story decisions. For the most part, I thought they were really cool. Each mission you play, you get to choose a lot of different things, from how you take it on to deciding to spare someone or not. And that's all fine and dandy for the most part, but these decisions you make tend to not affect the game as a whole. There are some exceptions though. Some decisions do trickle down throughout the story, but this is where I take issue. The decisions you make that do affect the story don't really affect the story. For example, some decisions will change whether some characters will appear in the story. My problem is that it doesn't matter if they appear in the story or not. The fact that they can and cannot proves that they never had a major role in the plot to begin with. The only real reason I know this myself is because when I beat the game, I started looking more into what people thought about the story. As I did this, I noticed that some would talk about characters that I didn't see very often in my game. And even some characters that I never even knew existed. That sounds like the exact opposite of what I'm trying to say, but here's the kicker. The people talking about these characters described the exact same ending I had in my own playthrough. In all reality, this issue isn't that big. I know that it would be almost impossible to produce a diverse, branching path story that can be completely different each time you play, while also creating a game as expansive as Cyberpunk. The problem is that CDPR told us that's what we were getting. So I guess my final issue with the game is that it could never deliver on what we wanted, or even what CDPR wanted themselves. It was overhyped across the years during development, and it would never live up to what everyone expected. Even still, I think that Cyberpunk is one of the best stories I've ever seen told in video games, and here's why. The writing of this game is probably its biggest strong point. It is a nice balance of funny to serious and exciting to depressing. Looking back at the story, it's a bit confusing at points, but overall, it's a wild ride from start to finish. What really drove the story home for me was the way that each character was written. From major characters to side ones, each of them gets their own chance to shine. I felt that most characters were written masterfully, especially the main cast. Each one has their positives and their negatives, just like people in real life. This really helps you to see them in a better light. They are more relatable, and you can understand why each of them do what they do throughout the story. The other thing that I loved about the main cast was that each one was so different. Each member of the main cast had a vastly different character arc. This helped give the game so many different emotions. In most story-driven games that I have played, there tends to be one main emotion with little branch-offs. For example, Last of Us. This game is sad. There are some happy moments, but for the most part, Last of Us does its darndest to make you feel terrible, and it does that better than any video game I've seen. Cyberpunk, on the other hand, is here to give you a roller coaster of emotions. Never have I played a game that does this so well and uniquely. Your highs and lows will change from mission to mission. One moment you may be mowing down gangsters in the back streets of Night City, and the next, you're out in the Badlands contemplating life and what your purpose is. I love that this game can do that, and it's a result of the amazing cast of characters that Cyberpunk has to offer. Earlier, I mentioned that there are some characters you won't even meet depending on how you play the game, be it the decisions you make or the missions you skip. At first, I thought that was quite a shame, but looking back it feels right. Every average player's playthrough will most likely be a bit different, because I doubt they will do everything you can possibly do in the game. Not everyone is a completionist. This really helps Cyberpunk because not only does it give the effect that the game is different for everyone, each subsequent playthrough will also have their own differences. I won't talk about any story beats in this review. All I want to say is that you won't be disappointed with it. There is something for everyone. You may not like some characters as much as others, but I'm positive you will find some that you do. The game's ending is what you make of it. You have to make some very heavy decisions near the close, and they were very hard for me to make. In my opinion though, I thought the ending was satisfying, well worth the time I invested. That said, I think Cyberpunk is the epitome of the phrase, "It's not about the end, but about the journey you took to get there." There is so much that has been said about Cyberpunk, and I'm sure that people won't stop talking about it for years to come. From the amazing world to the incredible characters, there was so much to enjoy in Cyberpunk. I hope that in the future the game can be redeemed in some way. It really should not have been released when it was. Glitches aside, there is a severe lack of polish that is present in other open world games. And the fact is that there were some that couldn't play it at launch because the game just wasn't finished. And it's pretty sad that they may never experience the incredible world that Cyberpunk has to offer. All that aside, I really did enjoy the experiences I had while I was playing Cyberpunk, and I look forward to jumping back in at some point. The game was an incredible journey, and I'm glad I was able to enjoy it for what it was. Someday, when Cyberpunk 2077 is finally finished, it will become one of the greatest video games ever made. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my review on Cyberpunk 2077. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed the game a lot, so maybe if you're interested, hopefully you can play it sometime soon too. That is if you've got a good computer or it's fixed or something. Anyway, yeah, if you are playing it and you want to learn more tips and stuff, feel free to check out my top 5 things to do in Cyberpunk 2077 video that I put out a little bit ago. Also, if you like the content on our channel, feel free to head over to our Patreon and subscribe there, where you can find behind the scenes stuff as well as exclusive content that you won't see anywhere else. Thanks again, have a great day, and as always, keep it rad.